Hello and welcome to another edition of Another Book Review. This week I'll be reviewing Evicted by Matthew Desmond. I'll talk very briefly about the author, go over what the book is, talk about what I liked about it, what I didn't like about it, who I'd recommend the book to, and finish off with what I'll be reading for next time. Matthew Desmond currently works at, I believe, Princeton. He has written several different books, but this is the book he's most well known for, Evicted. He won several different awards. He may have won a Pulitzer for this, and as well as a MacArthur Fellowship. So this book gained him a lot of acclaim when it came out in 2016. What the book is Matthew Desmond embedded himself in two different communities in Milwaukee around 2009-2010 and followed 8 different people as they went through an eviction process. He kind of studied 2 different areas. One in the south of Milwaukee was a trailer park mostly comprised of white people. The other one was an inner city area, 13th Street, in the northern part of the city. And that area was predominantly black. And the book is basically him following these groups of people as they go through the eviction process, what the legal ramifications are, who they lean on, where they go to get housing after that. He has access as well to the landlords, the 2 main landlords, Sharina, I believe is her name, and Tubin, who is the owner of the trailer park. And he also kind of has access to some of their finances and has really a bird's eye view of kind of the economics behind who they rent to, why they rent to certain groups of people, what the profit looks like for this, how the government kind of intervenes when necessary. And so it's a very comprehensive look at these things, and it's a very difficult book to read in some ways because these stories are really heartbreaking, but Desmond writes in such a style that you kind of find yourself turning the page. It's a very propulsive book, even though it is very difficult. The people who are in the situation, most of them don't have full-time jobs. Some of them have children. Some of them are receiving food stamps. Some of them are receiving supplemental income from past injuries. Some of them are partially disabled, and so it's a kind of a whole wide range. Some of them are recovering addicts. It's a whole kind of wide range of people in different circumstances who are all kind of going through this, and they each kind of go through the system a little bit different way based on kind of their circumstances and their access to networks. And I appreciated it because the kind of the most interesting part of it to me was the legal side of it, what exactly the process is, how much time the landlords have to, if they do want to evict you. My understanding is with cause it's like 5 days if you're behind in rent, and without cause they can just kick you out within 28 days for no cause in the city of Milwaukee, which I thought was kind of crazy. They also kind of go over the barriers that certain people have. So for instance, if you have children, it's much more likely that you're going to face eviction if you find housing at all. Landlords tend to not rent to children, and you see kind of the reaction of the people who are trying to be tenants. Sometimes they'll lie about how many children they have or try to find ways to lower the number of children to make themselves more attractive in that market. And the big thing is just kind of how the eviction follows you. On the legal side, I think I read that he says that it can follow you up to 20 years if there's record of it, if they have your name on an eviction. A potential landlord could find you for up to 20 years and basically refuse to rent you. So it is really a mark on your life moving forward. It kind of goes into the lives of these people, decisions they make, good and bad. So I can't recommend it enough in terms of that. If you're all interested in why someone may be evicted, what happens if they are evicted, the kind of safety net that's there or lack thereof. So I really enjoy is maybe the wrong word of this because it is really tough, but I think he does a great job of making you feel the way that these people feel and what they're going through and the kind of the difficulties. And he's there long enough to where you get a sense of the bare bones of what they're doing. Obviously, you're not there with him, but you kind of get the ebbs and flows of their lives. You see things from the landlord's perspective, which I think kind of made the book a lot more nuanced than it would have been otherwise. You see their perspective on things of how much money they're making. Is it a lot of money? Is it not a lot of money? You kind of have your own 2 cents. You see kind of the work that they have to put in and the difficulties that they have to put in with people, not only kind of trying to get the rent out of them, but taking them to court to evict them if they're not paying. And you get, towards the end, he gives a part where he talks about kind of policy prescriptions, and in that he kind of mentions that there's only roughly like 2% of people who are in the rental market who have rent-controlled pricing, and so just the lack of that availability for most people is probably not something that most people think of. He also mentions that the majority of people who have access to that are people who are disabled or elderly. So if you're like a 45-year-old mother of 2 or 3 little kids, you're a detriment to getting kind of subsidized housing almost from the start. And there's some cities that have waiting lists for years and years and years. I think he says in the book DC has a waiting list that's like decades long. So if you're not into that world, if you're not haven't had any experience with it before, I thought it was a really great entryway into it, of kind of the incentives that everybody has, the game that's played, and towards the end he gives kind of the what we can do if we want to change the system. I think if I had any quibbles with it, most of it I found really thorough. Extremely thorough. He does a lot of citations and stuff as well to show you that he's kind of done the different research on things. I think it does a really good job of bringing the landlords in, which I think is vital to this. And you kind of see from their perspective. He doesn't really get to... One of the 2 landlords is Tubin, who owns the trailer park, which is basically being taken over. Tubin basically gets taken to court because there's a lot of violations in his trailer park, some of which stems from drugs and prostitutions and other crime that's going on. And some of it stems from just his like blatant neglect of certain laws like sewage and the repair of the trailers. And he's also, he basically finds a legal loophole to do something that I think most people would consider to be kind of shady. Shireen is the other woman who also has kind of her own way of going about the world that I think some people would call ethically questioned. But Tubin is interesting because you don't get it to his kind of mindset as much as Shireen, but I think he kind of views himself as the last line of housing that people have, that you kind of come to him where you have nowhere else to go. And the residents really react to the idea of outside management coming in such a way that you are kind of questioning why they would do that. But I think that the book does a good job of explaining the incentives that everybody has and the discretion that all parties involved kind of have to some degree. Every landlord-tenant relationship to some degree is going to be unbalanced, and it definitely is. But you also kind of get the sense of Tubin and the people who work for Tubin work on a handshake agreement a lot of times, and you kind of see the informal economy and how that works in a really interesting way if you hadn't thought about that before. There's just a couple of points that I didn't like, and they're relatively minor quibbles. The writing, for the most part, is really good. I think there are some parts where he uses kind of melodramatic language. There's one part where he says that someone's face is lined with humiliation. That kind of pulled me out of the immersion a little bit, and it doesn't happen too much in the book, but when it does happen, I definitely noticed it. As hard as these people's lives are, I felt that there were parts where he was attributing things that these people may not have felt, and I didn't particularly need that. And then there are so many characters in this book that it's really easy to get confused who is who and what group of people live with which group of people and whose kids are to whose parents and all those things. The book, I think, would have been better served if there had been some kind of character tree at the beginning or at the end. And my copy, I don't think, had that. But you can kind of get to see the familial relationships a little bit cleaner. There are relationships both in the book that are familial as well as just friendships, which is kind of a big underlining part of the book, which is that the way that kind of assistance is tracked and stuff, there's certain incentives that that most people use to just kind of have what they call weak ties. and basically friendships in certain situations are as important as familial relationships, and he kind of comes back to that point again and again in the book. And then finally, if the last part of it, the last, I'd say 10% of the book is kind of his solutions to the crisis of housing. I think he estimates that roughly 13% of people in Milwaukee over the last, at the time of the survey, the last 2 years prior to the survey, had been evicted from their house. So it's a relatively, of renters who had been evicted from their house. So it is a relatively large program. He sees that in the eviction court process. There's a scene in the eviction courts that I think give you entryway into that world, which I thought was some of the best writing in the book, of just seeing like what that process looks like, who has discretion, who feels like the process is fair, and who doesn't. But if there was one part of it that I felt was kind of underserved, it was probably the solutions part, because it's relatively short, and his solutions come down to basically using universal vouchers in order to allow for a larger number of people to have access to, affordable housing, I guess, for lack of a better term. So the person would pay 30% of their income, and then a universal voucher would make up that difference between whatever the market rate is and the 30%. That's his put forward solution to that. I did a little bit of research in addition to reading the book, and it looks like there's a lot of pushback on that idea from landlords for various reasons. I'll let you kind of do your own research on that as well. But there would also be a relatively large cost involved in that. His solution is to basically, if you weren't going to raise taxes to make up the difference, would be to reduce the mortgage interest deduction that people who are homeowners typically take out or use to deduct from their taxes. Politically, I don't know how popular that would be, but that's certainly an option that he kind of puts forward. I wish he had kind of had a larger part of the book dedicated to that. I wish he had gotten into things just such as like the overall lack of housing, which he doesn't touch on as much as you would think. He doesn't really touch into zoning. He doesn't really touch into relocation expenses or job training. At the heart of the book, the one thing that I kind of came back to again and again wasn't so much the lack of housing as much in this book as it was the lack of the people to find jobs that were well-paying jobs. There are some characters who are kind of in a situation where that wouldn't be necessarily the solution. There's a gentleman who is basically is a veteran who was permanently injured. I don't think he qualifies for disability, but he may not be one of the people in that situation. But most of the people in the book were of working age, and the book doesn't touch on jobs as much as one would think it did, because that's obviously going to be a part of the story as well. So that would be the only other quibble I had. I think who I'd recommend this book to, if you're all interested in this topic, if you're someone who liked No Shame in My Game, and I reviewed Becoming Superman earlier for the channel, I'll leave the links to those below. The other book, Unequal Childhoods, it reminded me a lot of that as well. So if you liked any of those three books, I definitely would recommend Evicted by Matthew Desmond if you haven't checked it out already. And next time, it'll probably take me about a month to read it, but I'm going to be reading 1Q84 by Haruki Murakami. Until next time, please feel free to like the video, subscribe to the channel. I'll leave my link to those videos and my Twitter account below. Until next time, bye.